Hello and welcome to this new weekly show from Greenpeace. I'm Sophie Duker.
And I'm Simon Watt, and this is Ocean Witness.
Simon, you look great. Did you do something with your hair?
Oh, you did say that the dress code was shark casual.
I see, that is a killer outfit.
Well, I think the joke is starting to wear a little bit thin.
Well, as long as you're not going to be fishing for compliments today.
Now, there is a serious reason why I'm wearing this, and it is because I care more about sharks than I care about my dignity. And we're now today delving into the rather murky world of industrial fishing. And sadly, some sharks are being pushed to the brink.
That's right. On today's programme, we'll board the Esperanza to expose some dodgy fishing practices.
We'll visit a mountain in the middle of the sea.
And we have a shark expert standing by to answer your questions. But first, it's time to catch up with our Greenpeace ships in Antarctica. Do we have a webcam image? We do! It looks cold and wet.
We must still get decent radio reception.
I think that's actually a selfie stick.
And it's that time of the week that we ask, where's Will? Our mate Will McCallum, the head of oceans at Greenpeace UK, is on board the Esperanza and has sent us this video message.
We're just arriving in the South Shetland Islands after sailing across the Scotia Sea. We went along the north end of the Weddell Sea, which is the coldest sea on the planet. It's so cold, the fish that swim there have got a natural antifreeze in their blood. We were trying to capture footage of the A68 iceberg, an enormous iceberg, twice the size of Luxembourg, that calved off of the Larsen ice shelf a few years ago. Unfortunately, as soon as we arrived, the fog came down and we couldn't see a thing, so we had to leave. Now that we're at the South Shetlands, behind me I can see Penguin Island. I was lucky to land there a few years ago, a huge colony of penguins, and in front of me I can see the snow-covered hills of King George Island, where there are a few research bases. We're continuing our investigation of the fishing industry down here, but what we've already seen is enough to tell us that they're a bit of a problem. So when we were at the South Orkneys, we came across a bay where there were 3 separate transshipments happening. Transshipment is the process of moving the catch from a fishing vessel onto a cargo vessel. Now these transshipment vessels, we call them reefers, refrigerated cargo vessels, they're often operating in really dodgy parts of the world. We saw that one of them came all the way from an area of the Southwest Atlantic where there's no management. We asked them, do you have fish on board caught in this unregulated area? And they said yes. So then we tried to deliver a message to them saying Ocean Destroyer, which we'd painted on the side of this huge fender that we'd found on Elephant Island that had probably come from the global fleet of reefers. Unfortunately, they ran away, sailed away as soon as we got there, and so we decided to deliver the message in person, and myself and Alina and Uzania scaled up the stern of the ship to speak to the captain and try and do an inspection. They weren't very willing to talk, as you might expect, so we didn't get very far, but we did manage to ask a few questions, and what was so surprising was how little the chief mate knew, or at least how little he was willing to tell us, proving again that this is an industry that don't want scrutiny. They are not transparent, and yet they're operating in this pristine wilderness.
It's hard to imagine that Will was just sat on that sofa right there just a couple of weeks ago, and now he's just off scaling ships.
I know, it's amazing. Like, Will and the team are scaling ships, holding people to account, and you look like you've just come from a stag do.
Yeah, there's a bit of discrepancy within our show, isn't there? You've got to admire their tenaciousness, though. That's incredible.
I know. I mean, just what they found out, that the Antarctic is not as chilled out as we thought it was. It's not this pristine wonderland with no ships and no activity. It's kind of a hub of fishing, or at least industry.
But the unregulated bit is the bit that's a real concern, isn't it? If we can't tell what's going on, then who knows what is happening?
Well, I'm sure Will be the one to find out.
When there's a will, there's a way.
Well, Illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing isn't just a problem in Antarctica, it affects all our oceans.
As part of the pole-to-pole expedition, the Arctic Sunrise and Esperanza sailed across the Atlantic Ocean last summer. There, on the high seas, far from scrutiny, damaging industrial fishing practices have gone unchecked, until now.
Using some pretty cool reconnaissance techniques, Greenpeace set out to find those ships and document the damage they are doing to our oceans.
Close, it's 8 miles.
It says it's a net marker.
There's a visual, you can see them here quite clearly, so it means they can see us too. So it's quite a visual.
Ready for launch in 2 minutes.
We are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, not far from the equator. South America is 1,000 miles that way and West Africa is 1,000 miles that way, and we have been documenting this reefer transshipping tuna and sharks from a Taiwanese longliner. The longliner that met this reefer was not transmitting its AIS. This means that we can't see what activity is happening out here, and it makes these high seas a black hole of fishing activity.
This fishing vessel is a Spanish longline vessel. He's been out for 2.5 months. He has 40 miles of line with hooks under the hooks. He's targeting swordfish. We're getting a significant bycatch of mainly blue and mako sharks.
You see the shark struggling, and there was even a moment where I look at one in the eye, and then in a period of 3 hours we were seeing shark after shark after shark. It was like, I cannot imagine what happens in a week, in a month, in a year. Like, it's crazy, and there are no limits.
In the last few weeks, we have documented a dozen longliners in the mid and south Atlantic. And for each vessel, with each tuna or swordfish they caught roughly 6 sharks.
Sharks.
Yeah, and I wonder how this is documented. This all seems to be done in the dark, without scrutiny, without anybody knowing.
That is incredible in a bad way. That's really upsetting numbers. We are now joined in the studio by Jerry Percy, a former fisherman who now campaigns for the rights of small-scale and sustainable fishermen and women. Jerry was on board the Esperanza in the Atlantic. Hello, Jerry.
Hi.
Jerry, can you tell us what was your role on the ship?
Well, Greenpeace asked me to go along as a fisheries advisor. I used to be a longline skipper, and we were looking primarily on this leg of the trip at longline fishing. So yes, it's my area of expertise.
And what was the experience of being on that expedition like?
Well, it was interesting. Obviously, I've been at sea for decades, but it was a whole different ballgame, really. It was fascinating in so many ways. Firstly, we were well off 200 or 300 miles. I mean, I used to be an inshore fisherman, so about the furthest we get off is 80 or 90 miles, and normally very much closer. Being well out in the in deep waters, we did actually have a practice swim, and we were swimming in 3 miles deep water, which was interesting to say the least, especially as we were there for sharks, and you start swimming about thinking, we're here for sharks. So it was fascinating in all sorts of ways.
So could you tell us a bit more about what did you witness in the Atlantic?
Ostensibly, it's supposed to be a swordfish fishery with a bycatch of shark, mainly shortfin mako and blue shark. But because the numbers of swordfish have dropped so dramatically, well over 90%, reduction over the years. It's moved from a swordfish fishery for the bycatch of sharks to a shark fishery effectively with a bycatch of swordfish. When we were observing them, they were catching one swordfish for every 4 or 5 or 6 sharks.
Those species you were listing are endangered.
Everything is endangered. I think this was the point that struck me and has struck so many others, that it is the Wild West out there. There is no enforcement, there is no monitoring, there is no management. So the fishermen there are just fishing on all they know. That's the only bit of equipment they've got. It's the only sort of boat they've got. There's no other sort of fishery that they can focus on. So they just carry on fishing. They're going to fish themselves into bankruptcy.
So how is this impacting on the shark populations?
Well, it's massively impactful. Sharks, as you can understand, are top predators. They're high-level trophic species. And if you could imagine any ecosystem, if you take out the top layers, then it's going to have a dramatic impact all the way down. If this was happening on land, there'd be a furore. People would be marching and demonstrating. But because it's out of sight of land and out of sight of everybody, including the authorities, we've got this really dire situation.
What kind of techniques are usable to try and police this area, bearing in mind it seems to be so lawless?
Well, if you'd asked me that question a few years ago, I'd have said you would struggle to do so. But the development of both software and hardware, especially in terms of satellite technology, now allows us to see every corner of the globe. And the definition as such, together with all the tracking systems, the combination of all these has changed the ballgame really. And we are now in a position on a global basis to see who is doing what, where and when.
And Jerry, you're a fisherman yourself, but you still support this call for protecting the oceans and creating these ocean sanctuaries. Can you tell us why?
No fisherman gets out of bed in the morning and thinks, I don't want to catch much fish today. You know, we are hunters by nature. So there has to be management and regulation and enforcement and monitoring to make sure that A, we behave ourselves and that we can sort of achieve this fine balance.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I guess we've got to act as soon as possible to get better management of the high seas.
Well, we should have acted a few years ago, but yes.
We've been talking about the challenge of policing our global oceans, but there is one practice in particular that contributes towards their devastation.
It's called transshipment, and this is what you need to know.
It's all pretty bleak, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of unremittingly grim. It seems to be bad for fish, obviously, for the whole industry, but also for the people on board these places.
Yeah, and as Will mentioned earlier in this programme, transshipment is even happening in the Antarctic. We've just got some footage through. Can we look at those shots now?
What's more remarkable here, I think, is that Greenpeace is witnessing this.
We've also got some footage of Will making a cold call to a ship.
We are Greenpeace research vessel Esperanza, and we're calling to find out more about operations in this environment. Can I ask you some questions? Over. Are you also supplying these vessels with other products? Is there someone else that we could speak to on board at another time?
No, I not have business with you.
That was very tense.
Yes, he got a very frosty reception.
Oh, chilling. I suppose the thing is, although that could be completely innocent, without transparency, we'll never know.
Now, would you believe me if I told you there was a mountain that was home to both fish and lobsters?
Sounds fishy.
Well, there is such a place. It's called Mount Vima, and it's right there, about 1,000 kilometres from Cape Town.
And the Arctic Sunrise visited it last October. Let's have a closer look.
You have to imagine this is 1,000 kilometers offshore. That's just amazing to realize that we are hovering a mountain peak in the middle of the ocean. Already on the descent, I was surrounded by mackerels. They followed us all the way down. Hell, just in the swell, it's just mind-boggling. And you could just look at 1 square meter of the peak and you could just stay there for ages because it's fully overgrown with a lot of species that I've never seen before. And there's a lot of fish here that actually are tropical fish species. They would rather be found on the east coast of South Africa, not here in the middle of the Atlantic. And then you have to imagine this is 1,000 kilometers offshore. Mount Vima needs to be protected for future generations. There's no doubt about it.
We are now joined via video by Bukelwa Nzimande from Greenpeace Africa. Hi, Bukelwa.
Oh yeah.
Hi.
It's good to see you.
What exactly is Mount Vima?
Okay, so Mount Vima is a seamount, and seamounts are extinct volcanoes, which can rise at thousands of meters.
What do seamounts mean for wildlife?
So it's sort of like if you'd imagine a mountain that is on land and with the various mountain ranges allowing for different things to grow at certain areas. And because of that, they then create a solid foundation for deep sea life to settle. Well, basically what that means is they can also be seen as like oases or stepping stones for life in the middle of like a barren ocean or expanses of like sea floor. But when the cameras went down and the divers went down, they came up literally when they were telling us and showing us the footage. I had goosebumps on my back because just the life that you're seeing there, from schools of fish that you didn't expect to, I mean, even we sighted a few whales in the area, to crayfish that we had thought had been extinct or was close to extinction, just like beaming with life, from algae to kelp forests. It looked absolutely amazing.
You called them oases, and we heard that whales tend to make pit stops there during migration, like a sort of whale service station. Is that true?
And whales do make pit stops there because of just the variety of species that are within the area. So you'll find things as small as non-vertebrates to literal big mammals like whales making their voyage via the seamounts.
They sound like fantastic habitats. Could you tell us a little bit more about what effect humans are having on these seamounts, though?
So seamounts are considered to be vulnerable because a lot of them exist in the high seas, which are largely unprotected at this point. And because of their richness in biodiversity, what tends to happen is that they are often exposed to illegal activities or human activities. The main one being industrial large-scale overfishing. which can then happen at magnitudes that are unbelievable because there's no to like minimal regulation that is happening in those areas. So not only are they rich in biodiversity, but that richness can be exploited largely because of the fact that they're unprotected.
Did you see any evidence of unregulated fishing at Mount Vima?
So while we were heading there, we received a notification that there were two longliners that were in the vicinity of Mount Vima. And we actually saw one when we were heading back. So it just shows that if we weren't in that area, we don't know what possibly happens in such areas.
You mentioned there a crayfish, and Mount Vima is home to a very special crayfish. Can you tell us a little more?
Yes, so it's the Tristan crayfish. In the last couple of years, it's basically been fished close to extinction twice, which is actually quite shocking, with shocking stats. So when we went to Mount Vima, we thought that either one, we actually wouldn't see it or find it there, but we found it in its abundance. And all the nooks and the crevices of Mount Vima, this crayfish was absolutely there. And it looked like this was a home for them. And you could also attribute it to the banning of bottom fishing in 2007. And as much as that law isn't necessarily regulated or implemented the way that it's supposed to be, but it does show that if there is protection and an establishment of some form of law to police these kind of things, nature is again able to recover.
So you were on board the Arctic Sunrise, which is one of the smaller ships, the smaller ship of the two in the expedition. Can you tell us about the bad weather that you ran into on board and what that felt like?
There were moments where we were all frightened for our lives. And we just trusted the captain. And I think what I mentioned earlier is that the weather was bad most of the time that we were actually out at sea. And actually, it is not only is it the smallest ship of the three, but it's also nicknamed the washing machine because of just how it moves around. So the Arctic Sunrise is actually an icebreaker, which means that it doesn't have a keel, and keels basically stabilize like vessels. So what that means literally is that you're being tossed from side to side. I would wake up with headaches because you're bumping your head everywhere, but it was worth it. It was worthwhile. What we found there, the footage that we recovered, even just the story of hope that I think we brought back home, which basically further emphasizes the need of ocean sanctuaries and more areas like this being protected.
Thank you so much, Bekelwa. Thank you for putting yourself through that turbulent sounding experience.
Bye, thank you.
Now it's time for Life on Board, and we're going to see Hannah, who is the Esperanza's resident garbologist.
She's a what?
Let's find out.
My name is Hanna. I'm from Finland and I'm a volunteer deckhand on this ship. And also one of my jobs is to be the garbologist on board the ship. As a garbologist, I'm in charge of the garbage.
I'm here for your trash.
Wow. Oh, nice. And sorting it properly, making sure that it's ready for recycling, and then also storing it until we get to the port and discard it. And also my job is to keep track on how much garbage we have and report that to the chief mate. On a long trip like this, obviously it's important to make sure that all the garbage that we are going to recycle is clean and also nicely packed so that we can store it down the hold. So as a deckhand, I basically do whatever the bosun tells me to do. That includes a lot of cleaning and maintenance. There's a certain routine, but still there's variation. Like one day we can be painting and one day we can be driving boats.
At this point, when you go full speed, the about them to do like this.
It's amazing to be here and see the Antarctica. Oceans mean a lot to me. It's also like a huge part of our Earth is covered with oceans. So obviously we need to take care of that part of our world. This place is unbelievable.
Well, that was rubbish.
I mean, it looks like fun. It's like a trash job, but it looks like extreme recycling. I'd love to do that.
I could happily take out all my frustrations on one of those cans.
Oh yeah, that can crush was very satisfying.
And now it's time for your questions, and talk about pointed questions. This week, they're all about sharks.
Yes, and to answer your questions about sharks, we have Alifa Hack from Oxford University. She just spent 6 months in Bangladesh out in the field, so thank you for coming in today. Hello.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Before we get in, can you tell us sharks in Bangladesh?
Yeah.
Tell us more.
Well, we do have a lot of sharks in race in Bangladesh, more than 80 species, and we're still counting because the research on sharks in Bangladesh is pretty new. So we have more to look into. We have a huge trade going on shark fin, shark meat, and everything that a shark has. We have people depending on this business, so it's an interesting socio-ecological context and also a very unique basin that we have, Bay of Bengal. So yeah, a lot of sharks, interesting thing going on.
Enough of my questions.
Yeah.
So first up, from Hiba in France, do all sharks attack humans?
Well, that's an interesting question because predominantly sharks don't attack human unless you go to their homes like any people would do, right? If somebody comes and robs your home, a shark would do the same. So no, not all shark does. Some sharks are very fierce, like the tiger shark, hammerheads, or the great whites. But there are sharks which are really naive, like cat sharks, bamboo sharks, and they're very cuddly and beautiful. So no, not all sharks attack.
Probably still don't cuddle a shark.
Yes, I think probably not a great idea. Unless it's, of course, it's your co-presenter in a
Cool,
shark
you can actually.
I and Leonardo from Brazil want to know why most sharks can't stop swimming.
Many sharks, not all, but many sharks actually need to swim all the time because of their respiration system, right? So they have gill slits where the water goes in while they are, propelling in front of them, and then the oxygen comes into them. If they stop swimming, the water can't go in, and then the respiration stops. But there are some sharks which don't have to swim all the time, like North shark. They can actually have us be in a stationary position, in resting, where the spiracles forces the water in, and they can breathe. So,
a spiracle, what's that?
Well, there are two little slits just behind the eyes, and sharks have them. And then, as I said, like they are used for respiration. So, yeah.
Tracy from Idaho wants to know, what is the deepest living shark we know of?
Oh, there are a couple. I can think of one. It's called the frill shark that has been encountered in more than 1,500 meters somewhere in Japan. There's one called the goblin shark. That's also... and they are called the living fossils, right? A goblin shark can be as deep as 3,000 feet. So.
Wow.
Yep.
And it's a living fossil because they've been the same for millennia. They've not changed.
For millenniums, like 2.6 million years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bartosz in Spain, he wants to know, how do sharks deal with plastic?
Well, like any other marine animals, it's a huge problem for sharks as well. There has been a very recent study whereby they have found out that sharks are ingesting plastics and it's blocking their digestive system. The inner lining of the stomach is being damaged and they are losing their appetite, right, for feeding more, and they can die. So yeah, and there has been encounters of sharks being entangled in plastic, especially discarded nets. So yeah, it's a huge problem for sharks as well.
Layla from Mozambique wants to know, how long is a shark's lifespan?
Well, it depends which species we are talking about, right? So, for example, the Greenland shark, the last living one that we know of was 272 years old, and they can be 500 years old as well. But on an average, it's 20 to 30 years. Some sharks, which are smaller ones, can be 6 to 7 years as well. So it's totally depend on what species we're talking about.
Maybe a good one to end on.
Yeah.
Do you believe that there's any hope for sharks in the future? Franco from Argentina wants to know.
Well, I totally believe we have hope for sharks. Globally, I would say, but that will depend on how we are changing our behavior, right? Like, are you using plastic? Are you asking your vendors what sort of seafood you're using. Apart from that, I think it's also important that in the developing countries where people are dependent on these fisheries, and it's not only about conservation, it's about finding that fine balance where people, the social justice is also maintained, and the biological sustainability of sharks are also maintained to find that fine balance. And if we can do that, I totally believe that there is great hope for sharks.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.
Now, it's been a busy and sometimes depressing show. Let's take a minute to relax with our moment of serenity.
This week, we're going to take 40 winks with some slumbering seals. Sophie, you've been snoring.
Oh, sorry.
Feeling chilled?
Extremely.
How appropriate. That's all we've got time for this week.
Next week, as the pole-to-pole expedition nears its end, we'll have a whole programme about Antarctica.
So please make sure that you wrap up warm. And if you've not already signed our petition calling for a strong global treaty to protect the oceans, do it now. Click on the links either above or below this video. And until then,
goodbye.
Bye.